Mustafa Akyol is a distinguished American scholar of Turkish origin, author and public intellectual, whose reformist ideas on Muslim world have sparked deep conversations across the academic world and beyond. But this week, he was in news for a different reason. Imran Khan, Pakistan's most popular leader and former Prime Minister, shortlisted Akyol's book, Reopening Muslim Minds, A Return to Reason, Freedom and Tolerance, for study in his prison cell. Khan, contemporary world's most celebrated prisoner of conscience, has refused surrendering to the diktats of country's powerful army chief, General Asim Munir, and is facing virtual solitary confinement for more than 2 years. Politicians imprisoned before him, like Nawaz Sharif, used to demand delicious foods, but Khan is different. He demands books. Mustafa Akyol is currently a senior fellow at the Cato Institute in Washington, D.C., where he focuses on Islam and modernity. Over the past 2 decades, he has written extensively on politics, religion and philosophy, becoming a leading voice for rethinking the role of reason, freedom and pluralism in Muslim societies.
Prophet Muhammad was the only businessman among the world's founders of great religions before becoming a prophet.
Among his influential works is Islam Without Extremes, a Muslim case for liberty, which challenged authoritarian and literalist readings of Islam and called for a return to its rich intellectual traditions. But perhaps his most widely discussed book, especially in South Asia, is Reopening Muslim Minds, A Return to Reason, Freedom and Tolerance. In this book, he traces how Islam's early rationalist traditions were sidelined, and why Muslims today must reclaim those ideas to navigate the challenges of modernity. The fact that Muslim world's most popular leader wants to read Akyol's book tells us something about the significance of Mustafa Akyol's thought, that it speaks not just to academics, but to leaders, politicians and millions searching for a more humane, reasoned and dignified understanding of Islam in the modern world.
And my belief is, La ilaha illallah, there is no God but one. And we will fight. Mera tera rishta kya?
Moeed Pirzada, editor Global Village Space, has invited Mustafa Akyol to understand his ideas, his intellectual journey, his views on reform and freedom, his critique of authoritarianism, and how these resonate in Pakistan and Turkey's current struggle. This promises to be an informed, mature conversation at the intersection of faith, politics, and the future of Muslim societies.
What pushed you to write this particular book, and why you feel this moment in history demanded it?
In the book, I tried to bring some important Kalami issues, the issues of Kalam, to popular understanding. Sunni scholar in Pakistan or elsewhere, Hanafi or maybe other. Can a Muslim woman travel alone for a distance of 3 days?
What do you think about Imran Khan's leadership across the Muslim world, and what do you think about the future of democracy in Pakistan?
Therefore, it's definitely unfortunate. It's sad for our country to have someone like that, a leader like that, in jail. My own father, spent many months in jail after the 1980 coup. That's not good for that country, right? That's not good for rule of law. That is not good for trust in the system.
Do you think the Arab revolts were inevitable, given the rise of nationalism, or the Arab revolts were Lawrence of Arabia and the British intelligence and the British and French, design?
The British thought that the Ottomans were the problem and the Wahhabis would create a more open, progressive Protestant Islam, which actually there are writings about that, in the 20th century.
Empire idea in a modern sense, a Muslim empire idea, a large confederation, was sustainable? Is it possible?
As a Turk, I believe it was a great mistake that Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, Turkey's first president, abolished the Caliphate in 1924. He should not have done that.
How are you looking towards the future of Erdogan, the AK party? How do you look at this experiment of the Muslim states in the last 50, 60 years?
If you have an understanding of Islam, which is like Taliban-like at its core, that will make the secularists fear that so much. So they will also say, we should suppress them, because they will suppress us.
Thanks for finding time for my viewers. I'm so glad. And in fact, let me say this thing, that I was looking for you. I have been following your writings both in the press and your books while I was in Pakistan, and for the past several months I was trying to reach out. Somehow or the other, we have not been able to talk before. But I'm so glad and I'm so privileged that you're joining me in this discussion today.
Well, thank you so much for this very kind, generous introduction. I don't know if I deserve every nice thing you said, but that's very kind. And I'm very glad that we finally had a chance to meet. I mean, we communicated several times in the past couple of years. Thank you for your interest in my work. And yes, I've been trying to write about Islam and issues about Islam in the modern world, trying to do two different things. One is trying to offer some new perspectives to our ummah, to Muslims around the world on some important issues as I see them. So trying to bring some positive intellectual change on certain issues which you can discuss. The other one, which I found myself in, the other angle, is challenging Islamophobic, anti-Islamic, narratives in the West, which is also very concerning. I mean, the more I live in the West, the more I see that how important, how much of a concern that is. Because while we have issues in Islam, there are also people who really unfairly depict Islam as a threatening religion or have militant attitudes against Muslim societies, don't care about the destruction of our lives from Gaza to Kashmir, wherever you name it. So I try to kind of sometimes challenge those anti-Islamic views. At the same time, I try to sometimes challenge some views within the Ummah, say, which kind of actually justify those people in some way. Because if you portray Islam as an intolerant and violent faith, then the people who say this is what it is and bring hatred to all Islam and Muslims started to actually have an argument. So I find myself between those two positions. But yeah, I've been writing on these things, and ultimately I started in Turkey. I'm Turkish. In the past 7 years, I've been in the United States working at the Cato Institute, which is a think tank devoted to classical liberal ideas, individual freedom, limited government, markets, and peace. Peace is important because Cato is, I'm also proud to see it's a think tank that has opposed, militarism, which is strong in some circles in Washington. But my work is about how to reconcile some universal ideas of freedom and human dignity and human rights with our Islamic understandings, which I actually see in our tradition. But sometimes there are things in our tradition which are like a diamond that is a little bit buried.
Right.
You have to, take it out from that and shine it and bring it forward.
So before I actually go into, I have a long list of questions for you, right?
Oh.
And the first question you almost answered, that where you're coming from and how you happen to be in the United States. But before I actually go to these list of questions, I want to make two things clear. First of all, I took up your book around 7 p.m. last night. I downloaded it on Kindle. I had read its reviews before, but I found it fascinating. And I hope more and more people who watch this discussion today end up reading your book. I think it's a very powerful argument. And the second is that I want to make it clear that my questions are only a sort of an outline, a guide for myself, so that I can bring in the topics. Feel free to take this discussion in a direction you deem it important. And from your responses, I can come back with counter questions, because I have read your book. I found it fascinating. And I hope this is the beginning of a series of discussions between us. I would also like to invite someone Professor Ahmed Kuru of the University, which I had the opportunity of interviewing several months ago, and it was also a very good discussion. So my first question straight away is that reopening the Muslim minds argues for reviving reason, freedom, and tolerance in Islam. Now, can you explain what pushed you to write this particular book and why you feel this moment in history demanded it?
Big question. Again, thank you. I mean, this book is the culmination of maybe 2 decades of being a Muslim, reading the Quran, studying the interpretations of the Quran, Islamic sources, Islamic tradition, at the same time observing the world, seeing discussions among Muslims, discussions about Islam in the West within the Ummah. And I thought that there's a richer tradition that we have, which has some important aspects, important virtues, but we sometimes narrow our own understanding of Islam. I mean, probably people in Pakistan have seen this. I've seen this in Turkey. People say, "Oh, I'm in this sect. I'm a Barelvi. I'm a Deobandi. I'm a Sunni. He's Shia. Oh my God, they are the heretics." And oh, that guy, that was a heretic. This was a heretic. And like they kind of put themselves in a very narrow box and want to cling on to it, let alone considering any idea that from outside, I mean, nobody would, say, "Oh my God, that's a kafir. That's a Westerner. That's an infidel." And whereas I believe our civilization was great 1,000 years ago. Every Muslim knows this, right? We were the civilization that produced the best scientists. We were the civilization that had the greatest achievements in mathematics and philosophy and medicine and astronomy, and we're proud of that. But what was the secret of that golden age of ours? I think it's a big question, so I get into that in the book. But one answer is that we were an open-minded civilization. We were more confident, self-confident, and we did not shy away from looking into what the Greeks have been saying, what the Greek philosophy is, what some Hindu traditions are, and engaging with them, not accepting everything that they're saying, but Muslims translated Aristotle, Plato, and Galen, and that they are the ones who brought actually that whole heritage into Islam. Not because it was 100% compatible and people struggled in different levels, but they believe that God created us human beings. This is our religion. These are our sources. So we're loyal to them. But then God gave reason to all human beings. So even if someone is an infidel named Aristotle, who's not a mu'min, who's not a believer, who's not a Muslim, but maybe he studied the world, maybe he has observations, thoughts. So the universality of human knowledge was very much actually realized by the early generations. And that is the, I think, source of our success. Because that intellectual input was further advanced by Muslims. Gave us Ibn Sina, gave us Ibn Rushd, gave us Al-Biruni and all the great scholars. And people still honor that. But what happened is in the past 2 centuries, I think even before that, I think there has been a stagnation in our tradition. At some point, we said, "Okay,
where is the stagnation?" So let me now comment. So where as you started to speak, you said more than 1,000 years ago. The Mu'tazila versus the Ash'arite debate is something like 10th century, the 11th century. We are now in the 25th century. We're now in the 21st century, right? So do you think that is the point where the stagnation starts to set in? While the Turks and the Ottomans conquered Constantinople in 15th century, do you think even in the 15th century we were actually on the path towards stagnation when our military prowess was amazing and Europe and Western Europe used to shiver, was afraid of the Muslim power, but even then the mental stagnation was taking place?
Well, there are different areas and different levels. I mean, the Mu'tazila Ash'ari debate, and I'm glad that debate happened. I'm sad that debate got shut down by saying this is out of touch, and the Mu'tazilites should be silenced, and people even forgot what their ideas were.
What was the debate? People forgot what the ideas was. What was the debate? Mu'tazila versus Ash'ari.
In the book, I do emphasize the Mu'tazila, the early theological school in Islam, actually the pioneers of Islamic theology. I mean, Kalam, as we call it today. I mean, people study Ash'ari Kalam or Maturidi Kalam today. The Muslims who built Kalam in the first place were the Mu'tazilites. And Mu'tazilism was not out of Sunni Islam. People perceive it like that today. Early Mu'tazilites, Mu'tazila scholars, most of them were Hanafis. So there's an interesting early Hanafism with Mu'tazili influences, Murji influences, which I also discuss. And then there's a reaction against these schools on certain things. And I try to show in the book what the debate was about and why it was important. And I think on some issues, the Mu'tazila was right. And I make that case in the point. People ask me, "Oh, are you a new Mu'tazila?" I'm saying, no, I'm not subscribing to any school. And I think on some issues, they were not right, or they definitely used government power at some point, at least some of them, to uphold their view, which was wrong. So it's not like 100% that everything is great. But here's this one interesting question, husn kub, as people would say. Islamic scholars discussed this very interesting philosophical question. God has commandments, right? We know Allah has said, do not kill, do not steal, or, zakat is good or charity is good. Are these things good and bad because he said so? Or were these things good and bad even before the Sharia, before the revelation? And God is teaching us about these things, so the law is indicating these values.
Interesting.
This is called Euthyphro dilemma. It was discussed in Christianity. It's discussed in other traditions as well. Now, Mu'tazila scholars said, and later the Maturidis preserved that to a great extent, and I value the Maturidi tradition for many reasons, including this one. They said things are right and wrong even before revelation. So things are right and wrong in themselves. Whereas the Asharites said, no, things are right and wrong only because God commands. Right? Beyond the Sharia, therefore, there is no ethical value out there in the world. The Sharia establishes the ethical value. Now, and ultimately, the Asharite view largely won in Sunni Islam. Now, why this is important? Because if you say ethical values only are established by revelation, then why would you study Aristotle's ethics? Why would you think that someone who's not a Muslim might have a good idea? Because only your religion, only the revelation shows you what's right and wrong. So you only stick to the texts. Whereas if you think, of course...
And Muslims, correct me if I'm wrong, that the Muslim civilization heavily borrowed from the Greek philosophy and the Greek writings, the Greek thought in the initial 300, 400 years. Muslims actually translated everything that was produced by the ancient Greece into Arabic.
Exactly, yes. I mean, Muslims were the ones who brought that ultimately into Europe. I mean, from Andalusia, from the writings of Ibn Rushd, which is called Averroes in Europe, the works of Aristotle entered back into Europe, which started what would become the Renaissance and ultimately the scientific revolution and Enlightenment and so on and so forth. Of course, that Greek philosophy itself was rejected later in a different stage and new perspectives came in. But this ideology of methodologically studying the world, inferring idea of laws, causality, this and belief in a human nature, human universality, these ideas were there in Greek philosophy, and I believe these are actually many of them. I mean, Greeks believed in God, so they had a lot of heretical ideas. We don't buy that. So some of their metaphysical ideas were wrong, and it was right to reject them. But I mean, here's this thing. We have revelation from God. As Muslims, we believe the Quran is a revelation, and as Bible was the revelation. But is this the only way God has shown humans a way forward? Is this the only source of wisdom? Well, if you look at the Quran, you can find something else called fitra, that is human nature. And in one verse, it says God has actually revealed to humanity both the badness, the fujur, the bad things, but also the taqwa, the way to stay away from that and go towards the right path. So that's in human nature. So even someone who's an Eskimo or a Swede or a Japanese person can be ethical, upright, and he might build a good civilization and do good things. So as Muslims, we should be able to engage with that. Not that everything is right out there.
I want to come back to this. And I also realize that many of our viewers will be desperate to discuss what Imran Khan is going to benefit by in his jail cell reading from your book. But I have something in my hand. This is a printout from your book. And I read the lines and you'll remember that. This faintness, this is about theology and about kalam, because you mentioned kalam. So the lines which will appear on the screen is, this faintness of theology, as we will call kalam from now on, among Sunnis is not an accident. Because after the initial centuries of Islam, which were intellectually diverse and vibrant, there happened a significant decline and marginalization of kalam among the Sunnis. Instead, jurisprudence became the primary discipline. As a result, Islamic culture became a legal culture, a legalistic culture, focusing on proper behavior rather than proper belief. Today, most Muslims are living within this legal culture, which entails a plenitude of do's and don'ts regarding prayer, fasting, alms giving, ritual hygiene, dress code, dietary laws, family laws, and most controversially, criminal laws. Even the non-Muslims now also focus on this legal culture because some of its rules conflict with modernity. How do you reflect on this now?
Yeah, you open another big topic or chapter. What I'm trying to say in the book is, I mean, in the book, I try to bring some important kalami issues, the issues of kalam, to popular understanding, right? There's husn kubh issue, for example, the good and bad issue, or predestination versus free will. That's another thing we can, if you want to talk about. And I'm trying to show that there has been results in saying yes or no to this in our thinking, in our religious thinking. So there was more vibrant kalam in the first centuries, more diverse with different views. Ultimately, certain views dominated our thinking and said, okay, the other ones were heresy, and this is my right one. And whose heresy is it? I mean, one Muslim's heresy is another Muslim's sincere faith, as I always say that. I mean, for the Salafis, all kalam is heresy. I mean, the hardcore, you know. And for mainstream Sunnis, probably Asharism is the right one, but the other ones are not. If you go to Shiites, you know, they will have some maybe negative opinions about this one. So we kind of put ourselves in one box and saying, whereas I think Islam is full of amazing ideas, and I'm a Sunni Muslim, but I can go and learn from a Shiite scholar who lived 10 years ago or living today. And, you know, we might disagree on who was the right heir to Prophet Muhammad, but we discuss the same Quran, same Hadith, same theological perspectives. Now, fiqh, as you said, now once we lost this ethical perspectives for three perspective, natural, outside of the religious text, you just attach yourself to the text. And the result has been literalism, right? So that's what ultimately dominated the fiqh, usul al-fiqh.
Explain the literalism, you know, just.
Well, I'll give you with one example, just one clear example, which I give in the book. Today, ask a Sunni scholar in Pakistan or elsewhere, Hanafi or maybe other, can a Muslim woman travel alone for a distance of 3 days? Can she leave her house and go to see her sister from Karachi to Islamabad, wherever? I mean, or from London, Manchester to somewhere in British city. Can she do that? Now, there might be different answers, but some will say no, she cannot do this, right? She's not allowed to go alone without the mahram. Mahram is a male guardian, like her father or her husband, someone in the family. She cannot do this. Why? Because there's a hadith. There are a few hadiths in Sahih al-Bukhari and others, which says a Muslim woman, a believing woman, should not, you know, travel alone without a mahram for a distance of 3 days. In some version, it says 1 day. And our scholars calculated what is 3 days of distance on horse or camelback, like 40 miles, like 1,000 years ago, they calculated this. And they said, this is the distance you cannot go over. So a lot of people are saying still, this is the case, period. So now there's an other way of approaching this. And some Turkish scholars have said this, and I wrote about it, and I subscribe to that point of view, which is, wait a minute, let's try to understand why our beloved Prophet, peace be upon him, may have said this. Between Mecca and Medina, there were bandits in the desert. They would attack any alone walking woman. So she would be prey to these people. So of course you would not, in a very dangerous environment, in a man's world when women didn't carry weapons, or she could be attacked, God forbid, whatever. So it was about security in a very dangerous environment. No wonder there's another hadith which says there will be a time when a Muslim woman will be able to go Hajj alone. Wow. So it's actually, so instead of literally, okay, this is commanding this, you try to understand the rationale. It's called maqasid. You're in Islam, actually, there's a theory about that, which is important. And maqsad behind that, the intentions, the intention, and intent, maqasid is plural. You try to understand. So what happened is the more we close ourselves in, we just look at the text, what the text says, and we will immediately do it like that. Instead of understanding that both the Quran and the prophetic example, Sunnah, operated in a world, in an environment, in a context in which they always did the right thing, the moral thing. As a Muslim, I would defend that. But today, if you do the same thing literally, you might end up with bad results. You might end up with depriving a Muslim woman to, visiting her sick father or someone because she cannot go alone by themselves.
So apart from the literal meaning of the words, there is another problem, which is a cultural problem. When I was in Islamabad and we were living in a very posh, expensive sector of Islamabad, one of the F sectors, my daughter, who's now 19 plus, was 16. And one evening, it was very hot. I said to her, she said she wants to walk. I need to accompany her to the park or somewhere. I said, why don't you go on park on the street just like I do? And she looked at me with a sense of horror and she said, Daddy, are you mad? I can't even go out. I feel afraid in going out in the evening. In Pakistan, women alone, whatever age, unless they're very old, they are not safe in walking outside their homes, even in safe cities like Islamabad. When we came here, now she's free to walk around in Washington, go to different places. We're not really worried. She's not really threatened. What to think of the Muslim societies like this? Apart from cantonment and military areas in Pakistan, women are not free to walk on the footpaths.
Well, that shows a context where you may need a mahram, exactly as you said, which is sad, of course, that we don't have that security. We don't offer that security to Muslim women, right? Who might have that security in some other that, of course, secure part of the ummah too, or some place in the West. This is unfortunately coming. Not every problem in our societies, of course, is about religion. There is a non-religious, just male dominating culture, this aggressive male, and the idea of women are kind of prey also, but there, so it's just, you have that in some other cultures as well. I'm sad to hear about this in Pakistan. There might be parts of like that in Turkey too, or in parts of the Muslim world. There are much safer parts too. One thing is that there might be a presumption that a woman who's not fully wearing a hijab or let alone a niqab is not, modest enough. So she might be kind of open to these things, which is, of course, a very bad interpretation, again, of the whole religious idea. There is one verse in the Quran, unfortunately, our Muslim brothers sometimes do not emphasize that. It tells Muslim men, it actually first addresses the men in Surah Nur. It says, tell them to lower their gaze. Lower your gaze means do not look at women in a sexually interested or abusive way. Unfortunately, a lot of Muslims just focus on the next verse, which tells about Muslim women to wear and cover, and there are many interpretations of that. That's another thing, and I respect, of course, Muslim women choosing their own interpretation on this. But to tell Muslim men to lower their gaze so that they don't really go and harass women who are walking on the street. So sometimes, actually, it's not the religious text. We actually highlighted certain issues, not really looked into the wisdom of the Quran on issues. And I think this is one of those.
Okay, so then let me come to this very interesting situation. In the last 48 hours, we found out that Imran Khan in prison requested certain books, which he had been requesting for a number of weeks and they were not giving to him. And finally, we saw the list. Someone took the picture. And one of those books is your book of 2022, Reopening Muslim Minds. So what does it mean to you that a popular Muslim leader in a country as large as 250 million, who's almost like two-thirds, almost 80% people actually stand by him, is trying to read your book to find some answers? What do you think is he going to find out from that book?
First of all, I'm humbled. I was humbled to see that, and it's an honor, to be read by someone as prominent as Mr. Imran Khan, the former Prime Minister of Pakistan. Whether he will fully, like it or enjoy it, he might find it helpful. I'm not going to, of course, say anything. It's up to him. He has a list of other books to read, so I'm not the only one. But I should say that I would hope to see him free as soon as possible. I don't take a political position in Pakistan. I don't even know that much. I'm not because I'm a political supporter from any by any means. I support Pakistan as a country, as a fellow Muslim country. I don't take a side in its politics. But I also believe that if popular politicians find themselves in jail with charges that a lot of people think are more political than real. Again, I'm not judging that, but that's the impression a lot of people have. That's not good for that country, right? That's not good for rule of law. That is not good for trust in the system. I've seen that in Turkey myself.
I was about to say that. I mean, Turkey is notorious for that.
Turkey is unfortunately notorious for this. My own father, spent many months in jail after the 1980 coup. Turkey, unfortunately, Turkey is a beautiful country with a lot of accomplishments and I think great things I can say about Turkey, but also it's a country at war with itself for 110 years, unfortunately.
110 years.
Political purges and just, if we Turk could fight less between ourselves, I think we would be happier and we would have more contributions to the world and the Ummah too. But anyway, so I mean, when a kind of a politician ends up in jail, the people who vote for him feel some injustice, and that's not good for any country without even knowing the details of legal cases.
Have you been to Pakistan?
Unfortunately not. I've been invited a few times, never had the chance to go. I would love to. I have many friends from Pakistan that in the US we get together. There are Pakistani scholars I learned a lot from, and I've read from the great Iqbal to Fazlur Rahman Malik, who was one of, I think, Pakistan's great contribution to the intellectual landscape of the Ummah, who was a Pakistani scholar who then taught at the University of Chicago here until late 80s. And I still follow Pakistan's politics, some controversies in Pakistan. I think it's a fascinating country, a country built on the Muslim identity. So I have great hopes for its future. I know it has a lot of problems within too. I wish the best for Pakistan, really. I mean, when I was a kid in Turkey, there was the song Jive Pakistan, very famous. I kind of learned that when I was growing up. And I know Pakistan has been threatened by India for many decades. I wish, and there's been a recent conflict. I hope those things will be resolved peacefully. I know Kashmir has been persecuted for decades. Muslims in Kashmir have been under persecution. So I hope to see better days there as well. I mean, inshallah, someday I'll hope to visit Pakistan. Not yet so far.
So Mustafa Akyol, what do you think about Imran Khan's leadership across the Muslim world, and what do you think about the future of democracy in Pakistan?
First of all, I'm honored that he wanted to read my book. I'm humbled by that. Second, I know he's a very popular, a prime minister in Pakistan. Lots of people have great expectations from him. A lot of people believed in his leadership. Therefore, it's definitely unfortunate. It's sad for our country to have someone like that, a leader like that, in jail. I don't know the details of the case. I don't know the Pakistani politics that well. I'm not taking a side in Pakistani politics. But I can say that from my experience in Turkey, politicians should be defeated at the ballot box, not through, legal maneuvers. Politicians that have a huge support of the people should be in front of the people be able to vote them in. And it is unfortunate, therefore, that he's been jailed. So I wish him freedom. I would love to see him free as soon as possible. And I believe his freedom will bring a new energy to Pakistan. And no matter how he governs in the future, the very fact that he is free and he can participate in elections again and people can vote for him will be great for the country of Pakistan, for its democracy, for its freedom. Because if there's one thing that keeps our Muslim countries back, there are problems in bigotry and some religious interpretations, but one is the lack of democratic institutions and the lack of sense of justice and rule of law. And I believe it will be a contribution to justice, rule of law, and democracy in Pakistan, which I would love to see go forward, definitely, elsewhere in the Ummah.
So, when you said that Pakistan is a country built on solid Muslim identity, do you think countries can be built on religious identities?
Well, I mean, countries are built on just history. I mean, if you go to Bulgaria today, it's a country built on mainly the Bulgarian identity, right? Which has a Bulgarian church. Or if you go to, I don't know, Greece, or there are many countries, and especially in the former Ottoman geographies, it has a maybe a dominant identity, either ethnic or religious. I mean, Turkey's main identity is Turkish, and Turkish almost by default means Muslim, even if you are a very secular, bad Muslim, but you're still Turkish because you are coming from that thing. Now, the key issue here is, though, it is very important for that dominant identity to be respectful to the minorities, right? And to treat them as equal citizens. Of course, the dominant identity will be more visible than the other ones. It's natural. Maybe it will define the official language. For example, in Turkey, Turkey is the main identity. I'm Turkish too. We have a Kurdish minority. We have much smaller minorities like Armenians, Jews, and Orthodox Christians. Unfortunately, their numbers declined over the past 100 years. Did Turkey fully respect the rights of these minorities? Not always, and I've been critical of that. Just like Turks in Greece or Bulgaria have been at times discriminated, even heavily persecuted in Bulgaria. So it is normal that countries have a main color to it, I should say. I think that's why there are different countries. But it is very important for a country to show full respect and
to its minorities. But Mustafa Akyol, you also have a very majestic 600-year-long Ottoman history, right? How do you reflect at the disintegration of the Ottoman Empire? Many Pakistanis see this as a Western conspiracy, as a British conspiracy, the Caliphate movement. You know, you must be familiar that Hindustani Indian Muslims actually
supported us. Yeah.
Yes, and they created a movement, you know, the Caliphate movement, you know.
Yeah. Very much so.
Which finds its way into the Turkish school textbooks. And when I went to Turkey, and I have been to Turkey a number of times, I actually feel at home. One country which I really feel good at is Turkey. You know, I always felt myself welcome in Turkey. Pakistanis really love Turkey, and Turkey, when you read, at least from the news, has very positive feeling about Pakistan. But how do you reflect at the disintegration of the Ottoman Empire, which was a conglomerate of the Arabs and non-Turkish people, all kind of Muslims under one banner, into this Turkish nationalism of the Kemalist state? I mean, how do you feel about it?
First of all, I should say that we Turks, at least I myself, fondly remember how the Caliphate movement and the Muslims of India at the time, you know, so heroically, self-sacrificingly, you know, supported Turkish national war of independence. Women sent their gold to Anatolia because Turks were trying to save themselves from foreign occupation. We never forgot that. We really appreciate. There are strong memories between our peoples and nations, and that's just one of those. People ask, like, what is your identity? I say, I'm an Ottoman. I'm an Ottoman Muslim. I mean, I'm now living in America, maybe not a citizen, but, you know, living in America now, and I appreciate that too. But who you are, I mean, I'm an Ottoman Muslim. Ethnically Turkish, but actually my ethnicity goes back to Northern Caucasus, the Cherkess. You know, Turkey is a mix of a lot of Muslims from Bosnia, Albania, Circassia, and including ethnic Turks, which created a big mix. And I do believe there are. I mean, I'm proud to be an Ottoman in the sense that the Ottoman Empire was the protector of the Ummah, many parts of it in many ways, but also it was an empire that gave safe home to non-Muslims, to many different cultures and ethnicities. Jews always found the Ottoman Empire as a safe haven. They migrated from Europe when they were persecuted in Spain and elsewhere, came to the Ottoman Empire.
You mentioned in your book as well.
Yeah, exactly. And many different Muslims, many Christians, you know, lived under Ottoman Empire. I mean, Armenians lived in the Ottoman Empire, contributed to it until 1915. That tragic year when they were wiped out and killed, an unfortunately horrific expulsion. But they were there 6 centuries before, and it was a product of nationalism. What made the Ottoman Empire collapse? Well, two things I'll say. What really killed the empire is nationalism. The urge to create different ethnic states, nation states, right? It started in the Balkans, Greeks, Serbians, Bulgarians, later Albanians joined. And Ottomans actually tried to resist this by this culture they called Ottomanism, where all peoples of the empire, non-Muslims included. So there was a very interesting Tanzimat period, reform period that I find very important, because that's when Ottoman Empire tried to win the hearts of minds of non-Muslims by a lot of legal reforms, including legal equality, ending the dhimmi system of them being second class almost, and having equal rights with Muslims, parliament, opening up a parliament, beginning of democracy. That happened under the Caliphate. Like, that's when the empire was a caliphate in the 19th century. But this didn't hold. Still, there were independence movements. And ultimately, Armenian nationalism created a Turkish reaction, which led to the expulsion of Armenians, and ultimately, and the disintegration of the empire. Even Arab revolts, in the Hijaz against the empire. So it is more nationalism.
Coming to the Arab revolts, which are more near to the Muslim consciousness. Do you think the Arab revolts were inevitable given the rise of nationalism, or the Arab revolts were Lawrence of Arabia and the British intelligence and the British and French, design?
There is definitely some British manipulation there. The British thought that the Ottomans were the problem, and the Wahhabis would create a more open, progressive Protestant Islam, which actually there are writings about that, in the 20th century.
So British capitalized upon the Wahhabi Islam.
Yeah, exactly. But one thing, on the British and Europe, you said also that the Ottoman Empire was destroyed by the West. That's a lot of Muslims think today. It's more complicated than that, because actually the British and the French were allies of the Ottoman throughout the 19th century. Only in the past 10, 15 years, it's shifted, because the real enemy of the Ottoman Empire always was Russia. There are a dozen Russian Ottoman wars. Russia was constantly coming and take land, and also provoking Bulgarian revolts and so on and so forth. And against Russia, the Ottomans allied themselves with the British and the French for many decades. There's a Crimean War in 1856 when Ottoman, British, and French troops fought Russia in Crimea, today's Crimea, which Russia is occupying again, right? I mean, in Ukrainian territory today. So it's not like the Ottomans didn't see the West as always the enemy. There were different powers. They were strategic. They were thoughtful. They were trying to ally themselves with the British, and it went on quite well for a while. In the 20th century, with the rise of Germany, Britain decided to ally with Russia, and then the Ottomans said, oh my God, Britain is the problem now, right? I mean, okay, so they're allying with Russia. That's why they allied themselves with Germany, another European power. Now, I'm saying this because there's a categorical anti-Western attitude among some Muslims today, and say, oh, the West is enemy and the Ottomans were destroyed by... Well, the Ottomans themselves were not thinking like that. They allied with the British, and then they allied with the Germans. So they were trying to navigate, so they were more actually reasonable and rational on this.
And they were secular. So, but one thing, coming to the subject of political science, which is your subject, many Muslims, especially in Pakistan, yearn for a khilafat, they think that there can be a khilafat, So in terms of not being lost by words, in terms of pure political science subject, a khilafat can be a large confederation. It can be a large federal framework. I mean, if you look at the Union of Indian Republic, which is 1.4 billion people who are very diverse from each other in terms of regional languages and cultures, are living together under a sort of a quasi-federal framework. And United States has been, if you look at the expansion by conquest and purchase of United States from the 13 original colonies to westward, is also many times referred by political scientists, American political scientists, as an imperial order, as an empire, right? So do you think the empire idea in a modern sense, a Muslim empire idea, a large confederation, was sustainable? Is it possible?
You ask great questions, all big questions, so let me try to unpack a little bit. First of all, as a Turk, I believe it was a great mistake that Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, Turkey's first president, abolished the Caliphate in 1924. He should not have done that. Why? Because Turkey had become a republic already. So a year ago, actually the caliphate was separated from Ottoman monarchy, and it could have continued like a Vatican-like institution within Turkey with like a budget and authority of its own.
Even
It
after
could
the
have
loss of the Middle Eastern countries, you had
Sorry?
lost Hijaz, you had lost Saudi Arabia, Iraq,
It
Syria.
was not going to be the head of an empire. It could still be a religious authority for Sunni Muslims to employ scholars and studies and sometimes issue statements. Like today, OIC is trying to do that a little bit, Organization of Islamic Conference. I wish well for them. I think that it's good that they exist instead of nothing. But the caliphate could have become some authority, and when some crazy Islamic group comes out and like Al Qaeda does something horrible in the name of the caliphate, you could have some sane authority, because it was a sane authority, the Ottoman caliphate. I can talk about this.
Interesting. You had
And
new
so
way
I
of
believe
thinking.
abolishing the caliphate was a big mistake, and Mustafa Kemal did it for just because he wanted all power to himself, right? I mean, so he was an authoritarian leader for sure. And I think it was a mistake. On the other hand, I don't think today the solution of the problems of the Ummah will come with a new caliphate. Two reasons. First of all, I don't think caliphate is a religious obligation, as some people believe. There's a big dispute about that. I don't think it's a religious obligation in itself. It's not in the Quran. It's not in the Sunnah, because when the Prophet was alive, there was no caliph. Caliphate is something when the Prophet passed away, Muslims discovered as a solution for political leadership. And some caliphs were bad, some were good. So it's not always a rosy story. But I believe it was a legacy we could have protected and made use better for Ummah today. Whatever happened, happened. I'll also just remind these Muslims one thing. They say, oh, if there was a khilafah, we wouldn't lose this. Well, we lost all of them when there wasn't khilafah. I mean, the Ottoman Empire, we lost Palestine in 1917. We lost all the Balkan lands. We lost Cordoba, Andalusia, when there was a caliphate. That's not Ottoman, but before that. So to think that the caliphate will magically resolve all our problems and unite all of us, I think that's a kind of not a realistic goal. What we need better cooperation, better communication between Muslim countries. We need to come together on our common values. We need to resolve our sectarian or nationalist struggles. And for that, the spirit of the Khilafah maybe can be kind of revived in an OIC, in a version of OIC that is better and stronger. But if today say, okay, we have to appoint a new caliph like defined in the classical fiqh, who's going to be that caliph? He should be from Quraysh. Which country? Saudi, Turkish? Who? Pakistan, Indonesia? Even don't forget that establishing the caliphate was also a bloody business. There was a civil war around it, which led to a lot of struggles. So I think we should not give it a kind of a magical, like a solution formula. I think our problems are not about finding a big, strong leader. Our problems are about how do we make Muslim countries economically, politically, culturally stronger, more developed, more flourishing. It's about looking at a country like South Korea, who had an amazing economic success in the past 50, 60 years, asking, why don't we have our own South Koreas? Why don't people use a Muslim Samsung or Hyundai or something like that? So I think we need definitely more peace within the Ummah and more cooperation. I don't think it will happen when we find someone from Quraysh who's a new caliph sitting on a throne somewhere.
It reminds me, when you said that Mustafa Kemal should not have abolished the Khilafat, and even when you had lost the Middle East and the Arab countries, there should have been some center of moral authority that could give a certain sense of direction. I found a similar argument in a Lebanese author, I think his name is Amin Malouf. He basically said that Christians have, in the form of the Vatican, they have some sort of central authority that actually helps them to modernize, in the sense that with every passing a few decades or a century, the church actually surrenders to science and technology and accepts, so it's actually keeping pace. But the Muslim intellectual thought is not keeping pace. So they are still somewhere in the 8th century, 9th century, or 10th 10th century, and they are still basically stuck there while a woman a flying by, I mean, a Pakistani woman can take off a flight from Karachi or Lahore, change her flight all by herself in Dubai, can reach London or can reach United States. But Pakistani Muslim clerics are basically still stuck and grappling with the question that can she actually do this, I mean, while she's actually doing it, they're still stuck with the question. But when you talk of the center of authority, it reminds me of a very interesting seminal paper which Professor Samuel Huntington wrote originally in June of 1993 in the American publication Foreign Affairs by the name of Clash of Civilization, that became one of the most influential pieces of writing for the next 20 years. In that piece of paper, which was subsequently developed into a book, he mentions the Muslim world's crisis is not having a leader model state. Then he mentions and describes 5 states. These were Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Indonesia, and Turkey. Then he discounts all of them for their problems and says Turkey is the only real potential model Muslim state, given its majestic history, its better economy, its modernity, proximity with Europe, and so on. So but he says that Turkey is holding a begging bowl on the footsteps of Europe, trying to be included in Europe. And once the Turkish realize that their place is not in Europe, but is to lead the Muslim world. So with the rise of AK Party, which you initially welcomed, and now you're sort of disappointed when I look at your recent writings, do you think that Turkey had that moment and Turkey lost that moment? What went wrong?
I mean, Turkey, despite all the problems it has, which we can endlessly talk about, but I think still indeed one of the very pivotal countries in the Muslim world. I don't think there will be one leader of the Ummah or anything like that. And I think all countries should be humble about that. But definitely it's a very important country. One thing, I mean, Turkey has periods, right? My ideal Turkey is late Ottoman Empire, I would say. In the Republican period, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk and his secularism. I mean, he was a war hero who defeated the enemy powers and established Turkey. As a Turk, I appreciate that. So I respect him as a historical figure in that sense. But he was an authoritarian leader. He established a one-party state. It could have become a democracy in the beginning, but he didn't allow that. I think that was another mistake. And then he imposed a very rigid secularism. Now, I actually am sympathetic to the idea of a secular state in the sense of a state that is neutral regarding religion, so it does not go after any of its citizens for their beliefs or sect and respect them equally and under the law. So that's a good thing. But Turkish secularism went beyond that and tried to really uproot the power of Islam in society, closed down madrasas, Sufi orders, and this and that, banned religious symbols. It came to banning the hijab in the 90s, which I vehemently oppose. I would oppose it in Europe today too. And because of that oppressive secularism, Turkey's more conservative, pious majority, and I come from that, they didn't like this Kemalist secularism, obviously. And they came to really power in the early 20th century. And AK Party is the story of that. Now, the problem is, it looked really nice in the first 10 years because AK Party's story was, we came to bring freedom to everyone. Yes, we want more freedom for our base, for headscarves and things like that. But we are respectful and giving freedom to Alevis, that's a non-Sunni religious group, to Kurds and to this and everyone. So, and there was a European Union accession process they kind of clinged on to. And those legal reforms there really brought a golden age to Turkey. I think Turkey's best years was really between 2002 and 2012, maybe. And I was quite sympathetic and hopeful about that. Since then, there has been a decline, if you ask me, decline in economic values, decline in freedom of speech, rule of law. And from one Kemalist hegemony, we shifted towards the hegemony of the new conservative ruling class. And that's why some of the founders of AK Party are also disappointed. Some of them openly say this, some of them are critical. But I still hope the best for my country, and I still appreciate when there's something good, like there's a peace process with the Kurdish separatist group PKK. That's wonderful. I'm happy that Turkey is helping Syria to recover from the horrific regime and the civil war, and trying to move forward with a stable country with an economy and all that. And I believe Turkey will be better in itself and a better example to the Ummah when one Turkey doesn't dominate the other, but they have a live and live let solution under rule of law and pluralism. Turkey has a big secular part of society. People drink alcohol. They're not that observant. They have an observant, more pious headscarf wearing. It's important that none of these groups really dominate the state and use it against each other. But the state, the law, the republic is everybody's republic. Now, this is not an easy balance. Even in America, it's very turbulent, these days. But that would be the ideal Turkey I would advocate. And I think despite all its problems, Turkey has still things to teach. I mean, it's a society where Muslim values, Islam has thrived under a secular rule for 100 years, which shows you don't need an Islamic state for a Muslim society to keep it religion. Turkey is a country with a history of democracy, elections. I think they're still there and we're not going to go away. So I was more optimistic about Turkey 15 years ago. I'm more cautious today, but I still think Turkey is important.
In the very beginning of this discussion, you refer to yourself as an Ottoman Muslim. Many I've even read a book which referred to Erdogan as a Turkish Sultan. So whereas you are the Ottoman Muslim, he's now becoming an Ottoman Sultan. It's almost 25 years. He's the head of the repository for all power in Turkey. I mean, how are you looking towards the future of Erdogan, the AK party?
I mean, President Erdogan the thing is, I mean, when President Erdogan loses power, there might be a different political formula in Turkey. I don't know when that happens in the next year, or he'll have another term. Who knows? I don't know the future. But I'll just say one thing, not about him, but yes, I'm an Ottoman Muslim, but what do we take from the Ottoman Empire? What do we idealize? What we want to bring from the Ottoman Empire to today are different, right? As for some people, the Ottoman Empire might symbolize a mighty sultan. Everybody obeys him. He's powerful and he conquers places. I mean, this is a part of Ottoman history. Okay, I mean, I'm not against it, but that's not what I want to revive from the Ottoman Empire. What I'd like to revive is the Tanzimat and the Meşrutiyet period, as we will call them, where the Ottoman Empire started to become a parliamentary democracy, constitutional monarchy. The Ottoman Empire established a constitution in 1876, pretty liberal constitution, emphasizing equal rights for all citizens, established an elected parliament, non-Muslims, Jews and Christians were a big part of it. Legal reforms, women's education. So there is a modernization period in which Ottoman thinkers like Namık Kemal, another hero of mine intellectually, actually studied Montesquieu, Western liberal thought, and tried to synthesize that with Islam. Hayrettin el-Tunusi, another great thinker from Tunisia, but became a vizier, top vizier in the Ottoman Empire. They wrote the importance of freedom and how it helped. So I kind of want to revive that Ottoman spirit, where modernity, progress, freedom goes forward in harmony with religion, as opposed to a big sultan controlling everybody. And that process ultimately made the elected parliament and the government more important than the sultan ultimately. So I actually see that as a positive evolution. I don't want to revive the medieval Ottoman Empire. Its power is great, but I mean, its system is not going to work today in terms of an autocratic ruler.
So, but Turkey's quest for leadership of the Muslim world is effectively challenged by the Saudis and by their supporting states. I do not know if you remember, a few years ago, Pakistani Prime Minister, then the Pakistani Prime Minister, Imran Khan, joined hands with Erdogan and with the militians to create a new bloc to raise the Muslim issues, dissatisfied by OIC and the Arab leadership. And Imran Khan apparently is believed had to pay a huge price for that. I mean, he became unpopular. He was threatened by a certain kind of, lack of economic opportunities in the Middle East for the Pakistani people. A huge number of Pakistanis work in Saudi Arabia and UAE. So there is in fact an internal rivalry and competition for leadership in the Muslim world. I mean, how do you look at that?
You're quite right about that, but we might have gone beyond that period that you're describing, that there
Right.
was a very strong concern about Turkey in some Arab capitals, including the one you mentioned, a few years ago. But today, I see a different dynamic, a positive dynamic, where Turkey and Saudi Arabia are actually coming closer to each other in their positions because they both care about Syria, the post-Assad Syria. They both want to uplift Syria and keep it stable and help its economic transformation and its relations with the outside world. Even UAE is kind of, I think, on the same side with Turkey on that. Also, all these Muslim countries, I think, are rightly quite worried about, quite horrified with the violence of, the destruction of innocent life in Gaza, this horrific campaign that Israeli government has been pursuing the past 2 years now. That also brings a kind of a more closer, I think, position. I mean, I'm not a political observer. I'm not going to, interpret everything and tell where things are going necessarily. But first of all, I do believe that there has been unnecessary fights between Muslim countries a lot, and we need to minimize them. There was a very strong confrontation between Qatar and Saudi Arabia, for example, for several years. Now I think it's calmed down, which I'm happy to see that. I mean, look, we cannot afford to have petty fights between us Muslims when really there's a dangerous world out there, and when we need to support each other for raising ourselves. Like a country like Syria have been tarnished. More than like 500,000 people were killed by the regime and civil war, and like we all have to help that. And I think I mean it's a partly a function of wise leadership, but I think we can have more of that. I mean, what I'm saying is that I believe I'm in a better place than what you described before. And I hope to see, more cooperation between Muslim countries in the Middle East and beyond the Middle East.
Mustafa Akyol, you mentioned Syria, and Turkey has a special interest in Syria. Bashar al-Assad government used to challenge Erdogan by saying that the Ottoman Empire has ended and Turkey should not have the notions of treating Syria as a subject state. But Syria and Iraq were two countries in the Middle East from 1960s onwards with the Ba'athist rule that was ferociously secular, just like the Kemalist rule, right? And both were also anti-Western. They had aligned at different times with Soviets. They were against Israel. They modernized the society. They were for education, for science, for technology, for women's rights, and they did a lot of progress. And both of them collapsed. And in both these collapses, we see a Zionist hand as well, right? With the collapse of the Syrian power, the Zionist state has become more powerful. How do you look at this experiment of the Muslim states in the last 50, 60 years, where everywhere the modernistic leaders collapsed for various reasons, whether it was Jamal Abdul Nasser, whether there was the Ba'athists, whether it was Saddam Hussein, whether it was anyone, they all have collapsed, and they have been removed, they have been replaced by more conservative, pro-Islamist regimes across the Muslim world. What kind of change is this?
Well, the Muslim world is big, and Indonesia's story is a little bit different, for example. But what you're describing is very true, especially regarding the Middle East for Iraq and Syria. Which brings me to another point of mine. We are also unlucky, or it's a part of our imtihan, our challenge is we also, after a relatively stagnant, like a pre-modern mood, we had the worst forms of modernity. Like the modern, new, secular, progressive government we had was built on the Soviet Union, one-party state dictatorships. That is Syria, as you well said, and in Iraq, these Ba'ath dictatorships. Egypt was also influenced by that. Libya was influenced by that. And these countries brought some progress on some issues, but they were so dictatorial, they traumatized big parts of their populations. And then the reaction against that brought incredible turmoil to these countries, right? Still going on in some of them. So we never tried in the Middle East the only successful liberal model, which is liberal democracy, I mean, they tried Arab Baath, they tried Soviet-style Arab socialism, Arab nationalism, big government controlling everything, turning corrupt, corrupt bureaucracy. They tried all that. Now, one country did try liberal democracy, came close to it, and that's why it is successful. That is Turkey. I mean, Turkey, because of its proximity to the West, because it became a NATO member in early 50s, because it had links with EU and European institutions, Turkey evolved, despite all its military coups and all the problems and so on. Turkey came close to, more liberal democratic model in at least certain times in history. That's what made Turkey a great economy. That's what made Turkey, an educated population, a functioning political system. But despite all the turmoils, God forbid we didn't have a civil war kind of thing. And like Turkey's best years are the ones
At what point? So let me come into it. At what point would you describe Turkey as a liberal, secular democracy? Because as you mentioned yourself, that Kemalist state was a single-party government from 1923-24 till 1948. And then Kemalists, with the help of their secular judiciary and the military, were always cracking down on the Islamist or pro-Islamist parties. They hanged the Prime Minister Adnan Menderes. They were always cracking down on the Islamist or anyone who disagreed with them and on the courts. So at what point will you describe that Turkey was a liberal democracy?
They crowd down Islamists or Kurdish to whatever they saw. Sometimes Marxist left too, but you're right. There are periods in Turkey that I would see Turkey's golden years.
Right.
Better. Early 1950s, Adnan Menderes. Later, then Menderes was ousted and killed by a military coup. Evil event, totally. I hate the people who did that forever. I mean, in 1962, there was a coup. But between 1950 and 60, especially in the first 5 years, brilliant time. That's when Turkey joined NATO, Marshall Plan. He was both open to the West and put Turkey into NATO, but he was also a Muslim and he was respectful to Islamic tradition. He brought more freedom to Islamic communities, and that's why Islamic groups supported him. He started what the center-right tradition, as we call it, which focused on economic development, uplifting the country, building the country, respectful to religion, but not Islamist in an oppressive way, definitely. And then after Menderes, there are good years under Demirel and Özal. My hero in Turkey in the past 100 years is Turgut Özal. From 83 to 93, Turgut Özal, first prime minister and president, he was the one who initiated the European Union accession process. He was the one who put Turkey into European Court of Human Rights, which is still very important. He was the one who opened up free markets, brought free investments. He said he brought the idea of three freedoms, as you would call it: freedom of markets, ideas, and religion. And he tried to set hijab free, for example, in the universities. He was a Muslim himself, went to the Hajj, which shocked the Kemalists. And ultimately, early years of AKP, the first 10 years of AKP. So countries have good or bad times. So there are good times of Turkey. I think in those years, Turkey really made big progress. And we owe Turkey's success mainly to that progress. Kemalism had its contributions too. I'm not going to deny women's rights came in Turkey early. That's great. But I think the oppressive side of Kemalism, the authoritarian side of it, created a lot of scars in society, Kurdish, Islamic groups, which also brought a lot of turmoil. If Ataturk was a milder religious leader, things could have been better. Unfortunately, he was this kind of one-man show, and I think it had brought a lot of negative results.
Do you think Erdogan is a milder leader than Kemal Ataturk?
Well, they had a lot of similarities. Very different ideologies, I would say, but again, one big man, very strong, and that people cluster around him, and that creates a whole power, and so on and so forth. That's why I like leaders like Özal, who are more relaxed but more pragmatic and focusing on giving people the freedom so they can, do things.
But Mustafa,
Erdogan did great things too. I'm not going to deny them. I appreciate them, but I would definitely prefer a less one-man kind of, less of a one-man regime.
Mustafa Akyol, this discussion brings us to the central thesis of your books, especially the book we were discussing, Reopening the Muslim Mind. Muslim societies either have a regimented authoritarianism in the name of Islam, where the opposition is being suppressed, or they had the secular authoritarianism, like the Kemalists, like the Baathists, like like Field Marshal Ayub Khan, General Ayub Khan's military authoritarianism. The Muslim societies have not been able to achieve a balance between their Islamic inheritance and between the modernity. Why it is that?
I mean, this is a little bit of a political science question, definitely. I mean, how society is democratized, liberalized, there are a lot of dynamics, economic, political, historical. But I'll say one thing, and that's something I'm focusing on in my writings. We also make our religious understanding compatible with liberal democracy. If you have an understanding of Islam, which is like Taliban-like at its core, that will make the secularists fear that so much. So they will also say, we should suppress them because they would suppress us. So we have this kind of vicious cycle of what I call preemptive intolerance in Muslim politics. People think that, oh my God, that's what they want to get at. They want to put all women into hijab. I've seen that in Turkey, for example. Like the secularists always worried that the Islamic camp is so archaic. They want to bring this kind of medieval kind of culture with women's rights will be gone and so on and so forth. It was a caricature at times, but not totally. So, and that kind of triggered secular fears and made the secularists oppressive as well. That's why one reason I'm working is having an understanding of religion where religion is built on advice, preaching, good morals, ethics, but not coercion. Not forcing women to wear hijab, not punishing, flogging people for drinking alcohol, not having blasphemy, apostasy laws, that goes after people for their ideas, which are right or wrong, or good and bad or ugly. So that's why I think there's this Quranic verse, everybody quotes La ikraha fid din, no compulsion in religion, but I don't think we're getting in that in full. That's why I'm working on a new book whose title will be No Compulsion in Religion, No Exceptions. So if we should make a sense of what Islamic law, the Sharia is. I say the Sharia is something that the believers should voluntarily practice. Like as a Muslim, I practice basic Sharia. I mean, I don't eat pork. I fast in Ramadan, and the prayers and things in my life. It's as much as I could. That is my Sharia. So, but
can you sit in a restaurant?
I don't want the state to monitor me. Like, for example, just yesterday, I saw a news in Malaysia, in a Malaysian state, men who don't go to Friday prayers will go to prison for 2 years.
My God.
The state will watch them. Are you not coming to Friday prayers? If you don't come 3 times, you might go to jail in 2 years. Now, this doesn't happen all across the Ummah, but it happens there, and the Islamists are doing it. So that kind of perception of Islam as a religion that imposes itself on people through coercion, through power, also feels oppressive secularism in Muslim societies. It triggers Islamophobes, Islamophobia in the West as well. So I think it is one of our jobs is to articulating our religion in a way that really wins hearts and minds, but do not, scare people and think that it's an oppressive religion.
Everything which you say triggers tens of questions in my mind. When you look, there are two real models, two basic models in the Muslim world. On one hand, you have the mullahs or the clerics running Afghanistan, the Afghan Taliban, where women cannot, the girls and the women cannot go to school, to college, to university, women cannot work, their place is in the home. On the other hand, you have Saudi Arabia, where Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is now doing a different experiment where he's encouraging women to come out, to drive, to colleges, universities, to public office places, where casinos are being opened up, where dance and, international celebrities are being invited for huge musical festivals. At the same time, the political repression against the political ideas is increasing in Saudi Arabia. For the first time, even women intellectuals are behind bars. Perhaps I'm reading. There's more repression oppression in Saudi Arabia, but there's more sense of freedom for the youth as well, you know. So these are two different things happening. And then we have Malaysia, which I thought was a very progressive society. Then I read in your book how the religious thought police actually arrested you, detained you, took you to a Sharia court for your book. I mean, something which is totally unimaginable, that an American author writes a book in the United States, goes for a lecture in Malaysia, and there they basically, by just saying that there's no compulsion in religion, they take you to the Sharia court. How do you explain all that?
Well, I mean, I would like to see more freedom in every Muslim majority country on social issues, but definitely political issues as well. So I'm glad that in Saudi Arabia, women can drive now, or I don't know, are not forced to wear hijab. I think it's a Muslim woman's decision to wear hijab or not. I welcome those changes, but as you said, I wish they came with political more freedom, not oppression. I mean, I don't want to get too much into specific countries, but I mean, this shows we have to do some rethinking. That's why I wrote, you know, reopening Musulmans. It tells beginning with the story of how I was arrested in Malaysia by Javi, the religion police. I mean, it was a conference on apostasy issue, Ridda, that can people leave Islam, and saying I'm not a Muslim and, you know, freely do that. Now, as a Muslim, I don't want to see anyone leaving Islam, but if they do, should I coerce them to come back? My answer is no, and because there's no basis for that in the Quran. I mean, a lot of arguments on that. But I mean, in Malaysia, that's a sensitive issue. So the police arrested me and, you know, said, you know, don't come back to Malaysia and talk about these things again. Since then, I'm a little bit cautious about my travels, I should say, too. Some of my travels. But
so what countries are you not traveling to?
Well, I should ask my wife for a full list, and after the Malaysia incident, she said, you know, like, think twice before you may go to countries where there might be people who might not like your ideas on religious issues. But what I was saying is, look, again, let's look at the world. I mean, that's why I say let's engage with the world. Christianity was worse than us. I mean, Christians killed each other for being heretics, for Catholics, Protestants. Protestants killed each other, burnt each other at the stake. How did they get out of that? And, you know, when I read John Locke, for example, I mean, you know, we say, you know, Ibn Rushd read Aristotle. Today, I think we should also read more modern stuff, too. When I read John Locke, who's known as the, you know, father of political liberalism, he has this famous book, A Letter Concerning Toleration. I said, oh my God, this is about our issues today. He said he's trying to convince his Christians not to persecute each other because the other guy is from the wrong sect or has the wrong idea about religion. And he's saying the government should really respect everyone equally and leave religion to their free conscience, and churches, you know, civil society. So that's how they resolve their problem. And I think that is similar to where we have to go. We should really affirm there is no compulsion in religion, which means people should be able to practice their religion as they believe, whatever sect they are, Sunni, Shia, minority, majority. It should be their choice. And of course, we can preach people the beauties of Islam, but we should leave it to them. And we should not hunt each other for saying, you're a mubtadi, you are a heretic, you are this and that. We might not like their idea. We can say this is wrong from my understanding of Islam, but we should be humble about that. Like, but this is easy to say. But then how do you do this injunction in fiqh? What about this commandment there? What about what someone wrote back then? So I'm trying to struggle with these issues and working with other Islamic scholars. They're great scholars of Pakistan as well. So that is my next book, No Compulsion in Religion, No Execution. Not my own book, actually, by the way. It's an edited book. I edited and wrote a few chapters, but there are other scholars who are writing other chapters now.
So there are problems when you mix the theory and the philosophical ideas into practical politics. For instance, Imran Khan created the idea of Islamic welfare state, and he called it Riyasat-e Medina, the Medina state. Because while his welfare state heavily borrowed ideas of European welfare like National Health Services (NHS) and European welfare, across the Scandinavian countries, he also tried marketing it under the Islamic State, the Medina Riyasat, right? And the moment he started doing it, his critics in Pakistan sold him as a Taliban Khan, as an Islamist, as a threat, and many in the Western intelligentsia within United States and within India also took him as an Islamist. So, I mean, this is a sort of a challenge for Muslim leadership. How do you reflect on that?
Yeah, I mean, there is definitely some rigid secularists problem who would freak out in any mention of anything Islamic and would, depict you as Taliban. I myself even had that in Turkey. Turkey's secularists used to talk too much about religion. For them, it's one step before the Taliban. So we have that in the West, that sort of thing too. Now, I haven't seen that discussion by Imran Khan himself, but what I can say is, broadly speaking, is that I think there's nothing wrong and there's something good in Muslims taking source of inspiration from our Prophet. It depends on what source you're taking, what incident you're taking. One thing about Medina, the state of Medina that he indeed founded after his expulsion in Mecca. First of all, why did he establish a state in Medina, a polity? Because he was persecuted in Mecca. I mean, Muslims were persecuted heavily in Mecca. They just wanted to first preach their religion, live and preach their religion, which was not allowed. So if they had freedom of speech and freedom of religion in Mecca, the next episode will not be necessary, but that's not what happened. And they migrated the hijrah to Medina. What is crucial there for me is the Constitution of Medina, or the Pact of Medina, as people call it. After the first few months, he drafted this document, which we have. I mean, we don't have the original papers, but it's quoted in the earliest sources, which was a deal in Medina between Muslims, different Arab tribes, and Jews. There were Jewish tribes in Medina. And it says, the Jews who join us are a people with us. And it says, to Jews their religion, to Muslims their religion. So it didn't say Islam is the official state of Medina.
Oh, really?
It says to Muslims their religion, to Jews their religion. And Medina is this kind of civic entity in which we live, and we will protect against foreign threats, right? Outside threats, meaning mostly Mecca, the Meccan pagans. Now, lots has been written on this, and I don't think it's a blueprint that you can bring here and imply, because it was not between individuals, it was between tribes. It was a very different world. We should understand it's a very different world. But there's a spirit of pluralism there. And I would say today I would revive that pluralism in Muslim majority countries, where we can always say to Muslims their religion, to others. Well, maybe not Jews today, but millions of people. Maybe atheists today. I mean, it's more complicated now. It's not just Muslims and Jews, not just Ahl al-Kitab, but the world is more diverse. But whoever exists in society, the state is a civic organization for their rights and services. But what is interesting today, the Islamists have a slogan. They say the Quran is the constitution, some Islamists. Well, the Prophet didn't say that. He made a constitution. He didn't say the Quran, because the Quran is not a constitution. It's not about a government. The Quran is a sort of hidayah, a religious edification for us. It's what the Quran itself says. The constitution of any country should be a document which defines the borders and highlights the rights of the citizens and the duties of the government to the citizens to protect their rights. So I think I find a source of inspiration in the prophetic model in that document, for example. And lots has been written about this, of course. But so we should understand we live in a very different world, but there's nothing wrong with taking a source of inspiration from our religious tradition.
So I think when you say that Quran is not the constitution, Quran is hadayat, Quran is instruction. So in many Muslim countries, probably this will be a problem. I do not know, how many Muslim countries you cannot travel, in how many countries it will be like Malaysia, but maybe in Iran, maybe in Saudi Arabia, maybe MBS has changed Saudi Arabia. But to many Muslims, this would be this would be shocking, what you're actually saying. So when you actually emphasize upon Muslims living by reason, by logic, by modernity, you can espouse these ideas from the Cato Institute in United States. But can these ideas be discussed openly where they're needed the most in Muslim countries?
First of all, on constitution, to Muslims who will be shocked about this, I will also remind them the Ottoman constitution of 1876 that was done under the Khilafah. If you respect the Ottoman Empire as the Caliphate, the Ottoman Khilafah had a constitution. It's not the Quran. It's a text, defines the Ottoman Empire. It says all citizens of the empire, regardless of religion, have equal rights, which is remarkable, and tells the duties of the Sultan and the parliament and all that. So, what I'm saying is not shocking. Just people kind of sometimes create a slogan and believe in that. But can these issues be discussed? Well, it depends. I'm not traveling to every single Muslim country and putting a declaration out there. I'm writing things, putting there online and speaking on videos. Sometimes I don't physically go there, especially after the Malaysian incident. But this is the world of internet now. All ideas are freely shared in most parts of the world. Like, for example, my book, Why as a Muslim I Defend Liberty, has been published in the Dari language in Afghanistan after the Taliban came to power. And we did a book launch. I didn't go to Kabul and check whether the Taliban will be happy. What we did, it was an online event. So, I tried, thanks to the internet, I think a lot of ideas are now freely traveling. And I tried to, and also I should tell, I'm not a mujtahid, I'm not claiming to be a mufti or anyone religious authority. I'm a Muslim who's thinking about these issues, trying to bring the beauties of our tradition to the fore, showing some sources in our tradition that can help us rethink these issues. I'm not giving fatwa to anyone. I'm not claiming to be a mujtahid or anything like that. But, I'm telling people, Abu Hanifa, Imam Abu Hanifa, actually didn't think like you 1,113 centuries ago. So, even bringing those things and suggesting some changes can annoy some people, but I think we need that. Because in Islam, who owns Islam? It's God's revelation given to us, and we're left alone since then. We have the Prophet, we have the Quran, and of course, the learned, the ulama, they're important. But also one thing, we have a lot of scholars who, of course, know the Quran and the tafsir and hadith very well. But today you should know that, but you should also know the modern world in which you're living. And you should try to connect them somehow. I'm trying to offer perspectives on that big issue on which a lot of Muslims are, of course, working, and I learn from their works too.
Mustafa Akyol, are you hopeful about the Muslim diasporas in North America, Canada, United States, United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand, across different parts of Europe, right? Do you think the Muslim diasporas can provide a critical mass? Because in Muslim countries, the free propagation of ideas is not possible. I'm not sure what's happening in Turkey at the moment, but by and large, when I take a broader view, I don't think any real publication of stimulating, critical, creative, provocative ideas is possible anywhere in the Muslim world.
Turkey is still relatively intellectually open on religious issues, I should say. There are kind of more modernist or reformist theologians who publish and write around and so on and so forth. In Turkey, political issues are more sensitive than religious issues, which I don't try to get into that much anymore. But regarding Muslim communities in the West, I am. And because I see a lot of Muslim academic and intellectual scholarship freely, being discussed here. There are great scholars. My desk is full of their books, from Khalid Abu Fadl to Asma Sardin, and many academics in these universities. Sometimes they write very heavy academic books. I try to, bring that to more public notice if there is really something important. So I think there are institutions in the West, especially in America, Northern America. But the other dynamic that I see two problematic dynamics too. One other dynamic, maybe more so in Europe, is that some Muslims living in the West, but they close themselves outside. They want to really create a very close, tight-knit community there. So they don't want to engage with the community outside. that doesn't help the looks of that doesn't help them bring something new to the table. Also, that makes Westerners suspicious of them too. I think there's a vicious cycle. On the other hand, there are really vicious Islamophobic circles in the West who hate us no matter what. So, I mean, they are also part of the problem. So we should try to reopen a lot of minds in the West too, about Islam, about Muslims, and unpack prejudices against Muslims. So it's a difficult time in that sense. But, I believe this is one of probably the most difficult era of our ummah, in our 14 centuries. But in these difficult times, sometimes a new road opens. Like in Christianity, the worst time they had was probably after the Protestant Reformation, the 100 years of violence between Protestants and Catholics that really ravished Europe. But out of that, they were able to carve a way forward towards political liberalism, religious moderation, enlightenment. And I hope we may be heading towards that at some point.
Have you seen the video of some congressional, of a lady from Texas? I think her name is Valentina.
I did, yeah. Super ugly. And incredible ignorance combined with aggression, unethical.
So the interesting thing is this, that she's actually banking upon certain kind of feelings of Islamophobia that have been created across Europe, because she's referring to beheadings and girls being raped. I mean, these things are not happening. Muslims are not accused of doing these things across North America or United States. So she's trying to invoke those ideas of hatred. And in general, if you look in the last couple of years, especially with the rise of the Trump administration, you see a combination, an alliance between the white supremacist Christian evangelicals and the Zionists, and they are targeting Muslims and immigrants, people of color, for different reasons, so different kind of negative emotions are combining. How are you looking at that challenge for Muslims, for the immigrants in United States, and what is your suggestion?
I think a lot of people, not a lot, but certain pockets of people that you mentioned perceive Muslims just through a few things, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and bombings here and there. They would make a list of Muslim terror attacks. I was speaking to one of them. They said, do you know Muslims bombed American or European cities so many times? I said, well, those Muslims you're speaking about bombed my city, Istanbul, more than yours, because that is ISIS. And it is such a crazy, insane group that everybody's fighting against them. Even Taliban is with you against ISIS. People perceive a different civilization sometimes by looking at the worst elements of it, which happens on our side as well. Some Muslims will say the West is about crusaders and colonialism and bombings and killings. Well, there's that, unfortunately. We should oppose that. But there are a lot of good people who are opposing that within the West as well. There are a lot of people who want to live by. So I think there is this vicious cycle, and America has its own problems regarding immigrants and this and that, and political polarization and this. It's hard to unpack all that, but I think what we have to do as Muslims is to be proud of our faith, but also be humble, and to reach out to people and to say, if people hate us, first of all, there's a beautiful Quranic verse to Prophet Musa that God says to Musa. It says, go to Fir'aun, that's Pharaoh, and speak softly. Maybe he will listen. So that is Fir'aun, that's Pharaoh, that's the epitome of evil, almost like in the Quran, the worst tyrant. But to Moses, God says, speak softly, maybe he will listen. So against these bad, really, forces in the West or elsewhere, I think, there are a lot of them in India too, if I'm not wrong. Let's still, instead of just responding hatred with counter-hatred, let's try to diffuse that as much as we can. And maybe that will be a contribution to their
responding. Okay, that's very interesting. Let me raise an interesting question. So how do we respond, the American Muslims, to Valentina Gomez's aggressive position? What her provocative thing? How should we respond to that?
I mean, sometimes you should just ignore it because those people are trying to get attention. I mean, if that person does that and then Muslims respond to with death threats online or something, oh, that will prove that how, Islam is dangerous and so on and so forth. I think regarding people who are really Islamophobic, I think there are two kinds of people. People still you can talk to and saying, look, I mean, maybe you misunderstand. Can we have a coffee? And if you are a Christian, do you know Jesus and Mary are actually praised in the Quran that you're desecrating? Let's begin with that. I mean, maybe you can have a conversation. If someone is totally lunatic and not talkable, just avoid them. And I think sometimes, again, the Quran is, I think, the guide. There's a beautiful verse in the Quran which says, believers, when they walk humbly on the earth, when they see the ignorant, which say bad things, they walk humbly away, right? So I think sometimes we should just ignore, and because some people, like people who burn the Quran publicly in Europe, and there were figures like that too, in Sweden too. I think what they want is the attention and the anger.
Yeah.
Maybe we shouldn't give them that, and that will be the best response.
So I want to bring you back to some of the very interesting things which you mention in your book. In the very outset initial chapters, you mention an Arabic book of 12th century written by an Andalusian Arab writer that subsequently got translated into Latin and then into English in 17th century and then reaches Oxford University. And then you go on. First of all, I was fascinated by the account of the book. I had never heard of that book. The book was both a combination of John Defoe's Robinson Crusoe and Tarzan. I mean, if you remember the character, the Tarzan character, that grows up among the gorillas on an island. So I was really surprised that a Muslim Arab writer in 12th century produced such a futuristic, humanistic book. I was shocked, But then you also say that how so many series of 18th century Western intellectuals, if all significant, were influenced by that writing and that book. And then you come on to the Quaker movement that actually played a very important role in American concept of religious freedoms, the creation of the state of Pennsylvania, the Bill of Rights, and finally, even I was really surprised to the creation of the Amnesty International. And then you raise the question, and then you raise a very painful question, why Muslims could not abolish slavery. I want you to explain that. What was happening in the Muslim world when anti-slavery movements was being launched in the Western world in 18th century? And Muslims and where I come from, Pakistan, they keep on, blasting the Americans and the Europeans for the slavery. But there's no mention of the fact that Muslim societies had slavery and Muslims did nothing to banish slavery.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I mean, that's my book, Reopening Muslim Minds, begins with, actually after an introduction, begins that the story of Hay ibn Yaqzan. That's the novel. It was written by Ibn Tufayl, who was a Muslim philosopher, scholar in Andalusia, Muslim Spain. He was the teacher, or at least the patron of Ibn Rushd. So he brought Ibn Rushd to his job of writing, Aristotle's commentaries. And he himself was a philosopher. And the book is actually it's called by some people the world's first philosophical novel. And it's the story of a baby who comes to life on an island or put in a basket and comes to the island. And there's no human on the island, they're just animals. So he grows among the animals, but then he kind of is a wise man and becomes a person, and then it observes the world around him and tries to make use of them, but in a good way. There's a gazelle who gives milk to him, and the gazelle dies. He tries to bring the gazelle back to life and tries to make open his heart, and then understands how anatomy works, and then gets interested in zoology and anatomy, and then starts to look into stars, and then he figures out there must be a maker of all this, a creator who created this thing. And then he's a very ethical person. He never harms the animals. When he eats plants, he preserves their seeds. Like, he doesn't have a religion, but he uses God-given intellect and conscience, to be a philosopher, an admirable human being, right? A noble human being. Then a ship comes to the island, and He goes to society and he sees that they have a religion, and he realizes.
I have a question.
Now,
I have a
yes.
question. A 12th century Muslim Arab writer writing a novel about a character that has no religion. I mean, how is that happening?
He has no religion, but he finds basic truths about religion through his innate nature, through his God-given fitra, God-given reason and conscience. And that's the point. He's trying to say, even to fail, that in every human, there is almost like a divine core. We're not divine, but like divinely given noble core, which you can find in the Quran. God creates Adam as khilaf, as a caliph, like a vicegerent on earth, and God says we honor the children of Adam. It's not just Muslims, children of Adam, like all humans. So from that, he gives this kind of human dignity and human conscience and reason that is universal, right? So even without religion, people could become noble, moral, exemplary people. Now he goes to a society with a religion, and he sees great agreement with his findings and religion, but then he sees some religious people a little bit hypocritical or crude. So he goes back to his island. So it's a kind of, on the one hand, praises religion, the book. On the other hand, it shows some religious people are a little bit not living up to the ideal. On the other hand, a person without a religion could be a very noble, moral, ethical person, right? So the book shows that, and it's a fascinating novel. Now, this was written in Arabic by Ibn Tufayl. It was forgotten for centuries. Then a British scholar finds it in Aleppo in the 1600s, loves it, and takes it back, Pocoque, and he publishes in Oxford in Latin, and it becomes a bestseller. And then it gets published in Amsterdam and Paris. They call it the Enlightenment bestseller, right? Locke probably read it. Spinoza definitely did. Leibniz, these are Enlightenment thinkers. And Quakers loved it. And Quakers are this Christian sect who believe there's an inner light in every human being, as you said. So, and they translated actually. And it was a scandal in Europe. It's like, how do you translate from the infidels, right?
From the infidels, yeah.
Close-mindedness. Infidels being us from their
Muslims as infidels, you know.
Muslims, yeah. So, but they actually change it a little bit, but they still publish it. So it is a novel that kind of a humanistic novel, humanistic in the sense that it values the human and his faculties. It's not a secularist book. It's not an anti-religious book, but it's trying to show that religion is one way to truth, but there could be other ways to truth. Now, this has a huge impact and so on and so forth. But among us, it's less known. I mean, it becomes more fashionable in Europe and definitely less. Like Ibn Rushd's writings, they became more fashionable in Latin.
But as you describe, it also happens that another man arrives on the island from another island which had believers. Now, once again, the book doesn't identify who the believers were. So these both men, including the character Hay ibn Qaqzan and the other character, they travel to the other island where he tries to reason with the people, and he realized they were very arrogant and they were not. And so in the end, both of them leave the island with the people and come back and start living with the animals, and they die over there. I mean, what's the moral of the story?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't get into that detail. Yeah, he has a friend, Upsal. They go there, come back. So actually, that friend leaves the tradition and comes back to his worldview. So they choose a way of philosophy which takes them to God. So they worship God, they honor God, but they're not in that established religion. So I mean, it reflects this teaching that Ibn Rushd and others were at the time were embracing, which is the religion gives us truths, but those truths are also accessible through reason. Like, for example, Islamic law gives us the way to structure a society, at least maybe a certain context, but then people might have other laws. And Muslims see this today. I mean, you see Muslims sometimes go there, they say they're fascinated how the justice system in Sweden or Norway is really great, and people are respected. That's wonderful, but they're kafir. No. Well, maybe. I mean, they're not believers. I mean, they're not Muslims, but they are decent people. I mean, not everybody there, but at least people who, let's say, countries or New Zealand, places like that. I mean, there are good liberal, democratic, humane values in some of these countries. Well, we can engage with these. We shouldn't think that they're not Muslims, so they're not good people. Everybody can be good people. They could be Muslim and good people. Also, they could be Muslims and bad people. I mean, ISIS is those, right? I mean, there
Yes.
might be fanatics. There can be people who are using religion to,
But something goes wrong.
their ego.
But something goes wrong, which you point out yourself, and I think you're cautious in actually addressing the issue. That Quakers, a movement which is as intellectually rich in the Western world, which is the foundation of the human liberty in United States, the Quakers are influenced by that Arabic Muslim piece of writing from the 12th century. But Quakers ultimately take a position against the slavery. But the Muslim societies, there's no position against the slavery.
Yeah, sorry, I forgot that part of the question. Thank you for reminding me. It is true that we abolished slavery as the Islamic civilization very belatedly and with a lot of pressure from the outside world, mostly the Western countries. UK played a big role on that. And I mean, I tell about this UK lobbying on the Ottoman Empire in the Tanzimat period to ban slave trade, which they did. You know, that's a good win. But ultimately, but it took a long time because a lot of the ulama at the time said slavery is sanctioned by the Sharia. I mean, how you enslave people, how do you buy, how do you sell them? What about concubines? You know, how can you treat them? It was in Islamic law. And that's why the people who called for abolishing slavery in the Muslim world in the 19th century, including some of them in the subcontinent, Sayyid Ahmed Khan was one of those, they were accused at the time for being heretics, for being innovationists, bringing bid'ah, you know, some crazy idea. Now, almost everybody says it's a good thing that we abolish slavery. Now, except ISIS, maybe, almost everybody says, you know, slavery was a bad thing and Islam actually wanted to get rid of it. It happened in a long time, but, you know, the conditions matured and all that. But abolishing slavery was a radical idea 150 years ago, which shows that today maybe the reaction to other values like equality under the law of every human being, when women, sect, whatever, or religious belief is not a bad idea, but some people still object to these as heretical beliefs. Now, the connection with Hayy ibn Yaqzan and the slavery is, well, there's not 100% connection, but the connection is Quakers in this Christian sect, very interesting denomination, were really champions of some of these movements, including abolition of slavery. They valued Hayy ibn Yaqzan so much, which is reflective of the fact that they believed in universal human dignity. Every person, whether his skin is black or white, every person, whether he's a Muslim, Christian, atheist, whatever, Hindu, you name it, has a valuable soul. Who can be an ethical person. He can be a bad person too, depending on choices. But there's that kind of fundamental human dignity and equality of that dignity. The belief of that led to their campaign to abolish slavery, because in the West, slavery was racial, as you know. Some people even didn't see black people as real humans. I mean, there's a sick history there, which is still in the minds of maybe some people. By the way, their slavery was actually worse than ours. I should say that too. I mean, the American, especially chattel slavery, was more brutal than the slavery in the Islamic world. But ours was also.
So I'm glad that you mentioned that. I'm glad that you mentioned that, because I was talking to an American scholar some months ago, and he basically said that even the Roman slavery was not as cruel as the American chattel slavery was. What was in the American chattel slavery which was so cruel, which wasn't really part of the ancient world?
Not an expert on that, but I think the problem was slaves were seen as pure property, no rights of their own. You could kill them, you could torture them, you could do whatever you want. You could buy, sell. I mean, their families internally didn't matter. Whereas in Islam, I mean, Islam really improved the conditions of slaves remarkably. You have to give them the food you eat. They have rights. They can buy their freedom, you know, in certain conditions. So if a woman marries a Muslim man and has a child, and ultimately she may become, you know, as the mother of the child in her slavery, and slaves' marriages among themselves is respected. So it was slavery. It was not equal citizenship. So, but compared to Western, especially American chattel slavery, a lot of people will say it was milder. That was the worst. Maybe because it was the worst, there was a bigger push to abolish it in the West too. So there's an interesting irony. I mean, I can tell that in the pre-modern period, our human rights standards were generally better. I mean, religious freedom. Muslims didn't have a religious freedom problem until 2 centuries ago, until 2 centuries ago. I mean, Jews were being killed in Europe and they came to us to find religious freedom. Other minorities, people don't know, Huguenots in Europe. There was even some Russians who came to the Ottoman Empire because they were forced to cut their beards in Russia. The Ottoman Empire didn't care. Like, we were a civilization that received people escaping persecution. Is it the same today? It's not. I mean, it's quite the contrary. You see minorities escaping this and that. You know, Baha'is from Iran, Pakistan has a lot of problems, as I know. In Turkey too. I mean, more ethnic nationalist than religious. But I think what happened is we were a more advanced civilization. Rapid changes transformed the world in the past few centuries with terrible things too: fascism, communism, you know, racism, and all that. But also good values of humanism, liberalism, human rights. Amnesty International, a great organization like that. I love them, especially what they write about the Middle East these days. But we kind of said, okay, no, we want to live back in the 10th century. Everything was settled there. Like our imams figured out. Whereas I believe if our imams from the 10th century, 9th century were living today, they would be more engaging with the world outside.
So one or two questions and then we wind up. It's a fascinating discussion. I would like to continue this discourse. Could it be from the subject of political science that when a civilization is ascendant, it's rising, it's confident, it's more open, it's more tolerant, and when Muslims were the ascendant civilization, whether it was the Umayyad or the Abbasid or it was the Ottoman, they were more tolerant of the Jews and the other minority point of view. And when a civilization loses this confidence, it becomes more inward looking, more regressive. Then they start saying that, you know, we have to go back to our roots. For instance, I am perturbed by what I'm seeing in the United States. I mean, with the rise of the Make America Great MAGA campaign, it looks like as if they are actually saying the same kind of things which Muslims have been saying, that we have to go back to the roots, we have to look what make America great. You know, we were white people and we were Christians and these immigrants and these Muslims and these Hindus, and they all have come from outside and, you know, it's all hurting us, you know. So do you think there is a phenomena like this, you know, like Rome was also very tolerant, you know, in the heydays of Rome?
There's definitely that dynamic, and I think it's not an accident that the early openness of the Islamic civilization began to decline after the 11th century, as some people would say, and it had something to do with the Crusaders first, and then the Mongols attacking us from both sides, right? Crusaders coming from the West, and Mongols even worse, much huge destruction from the East. And in the past 2 centuries, we have another problem, which is colonialism, right? Attacking us. European colonialism, Russian colonialism too. People forget that in Central Asia and other outside powers, but mainly European ones. And endless wars, you know, going on in the Middle East and traumas and so on. But so it also creates this insular kind of dynamic. And some people say, you know, just go back to read Ibn Taymiyyah, you'll find all the answers of today, you know, there or something like that. Not to disrespect those scholars, but I think we live in a very different world. But that's a trap. I mean,
that's a trap.
If you fall into that, I mean, we are going to be in a spiral downwards furthermore. That's why we need to think about this. Yes, there is that push. But precisely against that push, we should try to open up minds. I mean, some people in America should say, and then they are saying, look, I mean, we will be great not just by, you know, isolating ourselves from the world, but quite the contrary, engaging the world more respectfully, you know, more humanely. I mean, America did huge mistakes, you know, but militarism in the Middle East, and I think with blank check for Israel today. But but still engage, but engage more thoughtfully and respectfully. So, and America is so polarized within. I mean, I don't want to even get into those discussions. I hope they can figure out some of polarization also really ruins societies. I've seen that to some extent in Turkey too. There is a dynamic, but we should also see that which countries have done better in the Muslim world in the past 100. Let's just examine them. I think Turkey did not do bad. Pakistan had better times, I think. When it was doing better, you know much better than me. But we should just map when we have less internal fights, when we have less authoritarianism, when people are more free to buy and sell and think and write and be with each other. When instead of imposing one view, we respect the diversity of our societies from different sects and groups and religions. There's more peace in society. Economic development is very important, and that happens not by a state doing everything, but by entrepreneurship, creativity, science and technology, education. And also, like, it's not rocket science. I mean, there are a lot of non-Western countries that have been pretty successful in the past, century, like Japan, South Korea, I mentioned. China, well, China, not politically, but economically, it's imitated the Western model of free markets, rule of law, and at least in economic issues. Well, it's possible. So, why don't we have our own Japans and South Koreas and for that we have to figure out not to fight over religion and use religion as a weapon for and against, but keep religion in a dignified place and learn from it and be inspired from it, but not use it as a weapon between us.
So one last question: have you been to Dubai? What do you think of the kind of experiment that Dubai represents in terms of a city government?
Actually, I never have been to Dubai. I've been to Qatar many times, or Doha. I've been to many capitals in the Middle East: Damascus, Iraq, Saudi, Egypt, but never been to Dubai. Everybody goes to Dubai. Well, I mean,
that proves one thing, that you're not a South Asian. Had you been a Pakistani or Indian, you would have definitely been Dubai. It's not possible to miss Dubai.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I flew through Dubai. I can say that, but never just came out of the airport. I flew to Dubai while flying to Malaysia several times back then.
Right.
I think, well, I mean, I think economic openness, economic rationality, I value that. That's great. We need more of that. But also, again, I also always want to add political freedoms into freedoms, social and economic freedoms as well. And the thing is, these things may be a slow evolution rather than an overnight change. I would hope that for the country you mentioned or any other country in the Middle East. I'm glad these Ba'ath dictatorships are now history. One thing is that also in the Middle East, sometimes monarchies are better than republics. I mean, countries like Jordan and Morocco have been relatively more stable, less oppressive. I mean, they're not liberal democracies, but compared to Bashar al-Assad's tyranny, I mean, because republic is a Soviet model republic that they imitated and created these one-party dictatorships, even one-family dictatorships in Syria. So we should work. I mean, every society has its own also history, right? Some has a monarchical tradition, some has still tribal values and all that. But I would promote economic freedom, political freedom, freedom of ideas in all of them, gradually, maybe not overnight, but that's what really makes societies flourish. With freedom, societies flourish. Without freedom, they really suffocate themselves. I would advocate the same thing for freedom and justice.
So there's a
they go together. Justice is very important. It's very important for people to trust that they will be treated equally by the justice system, no matter their sect is, no matter what their politics is, no matter what their persuasions are.
There is a difficult question for you. The way you were intellectually growing, contributing, writing ideas, debate about the Muslim world, do you think it was possible from Istanbul, from Turkey, if you had not been in United States over the past several years? Do you think you would have been the same person?
I think so. I mean, I was in Istanbul until 7 years ago, so I wrote some of my books in Turkey already, and in the U.S. I came to the U.S. because I found a better job to write on these issues. I mean, when you're a writer, I mean, you need to have an institution that like an institute, which I have with Cato, and it's been a great opportunity for me. I teach at Boston College. I do also teach at the Acton University, Acton Institute, that's in Michigan. So US has a lot of institutions that are separate from the government, that are founded by NGOs, I mean, foundations and philanthropy and all that. So there's a flourishing intellectual scene, and I became a part of it, focusing on the issues of our ummah. In Turkey, I was going to be do the same thing, but I mean, I was a newspaper writer in Turkey, but newspapers became, most of them became one line. I was teaching at a university. I don't know whether I would do that today. So Turkey became a little bit intellectually closed compared to what was 10 years ago, and that's one reason I moved to here. But again, I think in Turkey, my book got translated. My writings gets translated into Turkish too. I have a Turkish Twitter account. I once in a while say something.
No, if Turkey is closing down, if the Muslim mind in Turkey is closing down in the past 10, 15 years, which other country can a scholar sit in and write about the Muslim world? I mean, where you can write, where you can publish, where you're
For
not.
Turkey, I wouldn't go that far. I would say it's going through a bottleneck. Like and especially in Turkey, the real concern is political. Like your stance against the government on political issues is more of an issue rather than your views on religion. So I think that's Turkey's, I think, main problem, which has been main problem under the Kemalists, Ataturk period as well. But regarding the Ummah, I mean, Indonesia is a very interesting case. World's largest Muslim majority country with Muslim scholarship and great institutions coming with positive messages about the future of Ummah. I think Pakistan still has amazing scholarship. I mean, some Pakistani scholars are not in the US, sorry, not in Pakistan, now in the US, like Ghamidi, for example, who I had a chance to meet here.
But Ghamidi had been made to run away from Pakistan, first to Malaysia and then to United States.
Yes, that's true. But, that's the world it is. I mean, John Locke actually couldn't publish his letter concerning toleration in England. He went, over the sea to go to France and,
That was what century? 18th century?
That's 1600,
17th century, 18th
late 17th century, yeah.
But look at no Indian writer, author. I mean, Arundhati Rai, you might be familiar with her. I mean, a brilliant writer. I mean, she writes against the Indian establishment and against the Hindutva, but she continues to live inside India.
Yeah, I mean, I cannot compare those countries. I think India is also, as I know, is a pretty downward spiral. I think.
I agree.
And also the intimidation of Muslims in India is, I think, a huge problem. And I see huge Islamophobic narrative in some circles in India. I hope India's pluralist traditions will be strong enough to, push back against that. I mean, well, my most favorite Muslim majority country is Bosnia Herzegovina, where my wife is from. It is the freest Muslim country, the freest Muslim liberal democracy in terms of its freedom of speech and religion and expression. As I documented at a Cato Institute report a few years ago. And I think in North Africa, Morocco still has interesting views. I mean, I can name countries. There are good and bad trends. I'm hopeful, cautiously hopeful, that I'm praying for Syria because it's the heart of the Middle East. It just went through horrific trauma. Syrian refugees in Turkey, I know all of their stories. Now there's a hope that it can succeed. I wish the best for the new government. I hope it will be as inclusive as possible with the minorities. I hope outside powers who are trying to destabilize Syria cannot succeed. So I think this is a long-term battle. It's not that we're going to wake up and see a much better Muslim world in 3 years, but we should try to take people away trying bad alternatives. Like Baathism was such a horrific model that came to the Arab world, dominated from 60s in 2020, like 60 years, wasted, opportunity in Syria. Again, militant Islamism, like going after people because they are from the other sect. I mean, or Taliban-like kind of regimes where you enforce one view of Islam, like in Iran, where you force women to wear the hijab and just, beat them if they don't, and people start to burn the hijabs because of that. Like, why do you need that? I mean, yes, Shah was a dictatorship, but it didn't have to be replaced by another dictatorship. I think I mean, with all ups and downs, I hope we are going to take lessons. It was not easy. Just one thing. Europe did not become an island of liberal democracy and nice people overnight. And they have a horrific history. Begin with Protestant Catholic slaughters and 30 Years' War, and then they figured out religion, but not nationalism, fascism, Nazism, World War, Second World War. I told one friend, like, if Europe could become liberal, anybody could become liberal. So it took a long time too. Liberal in the sense of peaceful, democratic, free, and prosperous. Yeah, I think
I would like you to conclude. I would like you to conclude by giving a message to all the followers of Imran Khan, who looked at great Muslim leader, who's now reading your book. What would be your message to them at this point?
I mean, again, I'm not taking side in Pakistani politics. I respect Pakistan as a country, and I don't want to get into the disputes among my beloved Pakistani brothers on certain issues. But I certainly want Prime Minister Imran Khan to be free as soon as possible. I would want to see him, be in politics again if he wants to. I want to see people vote for him if they think he's the future of Pakistan, and if he doesn't do well, he should be, voted out in an election, and that's how democracy should work. And people who don't like him, who are against his ideas, should do better in winning elections against him. And that's what I can say. And I wish the best for his family. I'm sure it's not easy to have your husband or your father in jail. I had myself, had my father in jail when I was a kid. So I wish him freedom as soon as possible, hopefully tomorrow, or if possible. And I want Pakistani democracy to, continue and stronger.
Mustafa Akyol, thank you so much for finding time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. It's my pleasure.